Now, Rebecca, how are you?
I'm blessed. How are you?
I'm good. By the way, just remind me, Rebecca, what are you doing? Where are you with your studies from research point of view?
I'm doing a PhD in international tax law, and I'm just doing corrections because it came back with corrections. I actually submitted it for examination, so they brought it back with
Wow.
corrections. Yeah.
What do you mean tax? What are you what have you investigated? Because if it's corrections, it means it's done and share with us.
You mean briefly what the thesis is about?
Yeah, what your research is all
Oh, okay.
about, and yeah.
It's about international tax principles.
Mhm.
Basically, it's kind of like checking whether the international tax principles are fair to countries like developing countries like South Africa, well, Africans and those poor countries in Asia, because
Yeah.
you see sometimes when countries like the Americas, the Europes, the big countries, when they have international conventions with smaller countries or developing countries, they tend to be sort of like they tend to bully them so that they have better terms than the developing countries because the developing countries are in a less bargaining position. So they'll just accept anything. Let's say they say, for example, we want to share uh, tax on a
On emissions, let's
yeah,
say on
yeah,
carbon
maybe
emissions.
yeah. And then they say that the Americans, we are going to take 10%, and you, maybe South Africa, you take 5%. But you'd find that the the source of that income is actually in South Africa. So it actually benefits the Americans more than the South Africans. And yet it's supposed to be vice versa because the source of the income is in South Africa. So that's what
Yeah.
I'm looking at, whether the principles are fair to these developing countries. Is there anything that needs to be changed, or is there anything that these developing countries need to do? Do they need to put their foot down and say no more? You know, we have
Yeah.
to, yeah, something like that.
Okay. So we're going to push you. We hope you don't mind because you've got corrections to make anyway. So you can use this opportunity to to apply those corrections on us. So what do you mean? What is the, I mean, I want to understand conceptually when you talk about international tax principle. What does that mean?
Um, okay, it means international rules like the OECD. You see their tax conventions, like
Yes.
the VCLT. Do you know the VCLT?
No, I want you to define
Uh,
some of these concepts that you're using
okay,
for me. So at least I
VC.
follow you.
Okay. Now the VCLT is Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. And then I've got the OECD. Now this one is kind of like the main one.
Yeah.
Now this one, it's this is an organization which has countries like these big countries which are members, but also there are countries that are not members that benefit from this organization. Now this organization deals with a lot of things, but obviously I'm focused on tax. So this organization has a convention on tax, which sort of is sort of like a yardstick or a guideline for countries to use when they are negotiating on tax conventions or tax treaties. We call them you call- yeah, text. Okay, let me just say text treaties. Yes, because remember,
Okay.
each and every
What?
country. Sorry,
Mm, no,
go on.
no.
What?
What I wanted to to establish, and please pardon me for interrupting you.
Okay.
What I wanted to establish is, if I am a student now here today, which I am,
okay,
and you're saying to me your research or your investigation or the work that you do is to do with international tax principle.
Okay.
I want to, and I want to understand, what are you doing with it? So if I say, what is the research all about? And you used many concepts, and like developing, developed, and poor countries. Now I'm thinking to myself, okay, the more I listen, the more I get confused.
Okay.
So now I'm saying, well, if you look at the international tax principle that you're talking about, what about it? In other words, are you looking into how fair and unfair is this to the different set of countries that you have? I want to have an understanding, because if you say developed, I'm going to say what is developed, what is developing, and what is poor. I can see the three layers or the three differentiators, and you say there's an unfairness on this. Now you say unfairness is in the sense that the pie is not being cut equitably. So I'm asking myself, what is it that Rebecca is researching? What is the research about?
Okay. Now, firstly, my apologies.
No. Don't apologize. I'm just, remember, this is now an engagement on research so that we can all see what, there's no need for, please go ahead.
Now, firstly, maybe let me explain what developed and non-developed country is. Now, developed country is those rich countries, the first world countries. And then, yes, and then the developing countries are the Africans and those Asian countries that are not the Malaysias and what. So now, you see, when people when these countries are negotiating on tax treaties on how to share income of tax, like SARS and in Zimbabwe it's ZIMRA. SARS and ZIMRA. Let's say Zimbabwe is a first world country. So now what I'm doing is I want to see Zimbabwe as a developed country or as a first world country. When it's negotiating tax treaty with South Africa, is it being fair on when, like, for example, withholding tax on a certain income? Are they being fair? Are they giving South Africa a fair share of tax on that particular income, since South Africa is the country where the income is coming from? So you will see that with most of these developed countries, like the first world countries, they would usually get a bigger portion than the source country, which is South Africa, where the income is coming from. So now people have woken up. They're now starting to complain that, look, these first world countries or these countries which are developed, they're taking advantage of the developing countries or the African countries or the small countries in Asia. We need to wake up. So now, what I'm doing now, I'm looking at, because when they negotiate tax treaties, there's a certain document that they use as a yardstick or as a guideline to construct their tax treaties.
Okay.
So yes, there's this document that's called an OECD tax convention. OECD meaning Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Sure.
So the OECD provided this document for its members. Obviously, its members are the Russias, the Americas, the Israels, the big countries. But
the rich countries.
Yes. So any country can use it. But now the UN also created its own. When it created its own document for countries to use when they're making their tax treaties, it's kind of now it's leaning towards favoring the developing countries, which is the African countries or the poorer countries. So now I'm looking at all those documents, the OECD documents, the UN document, and other laws that that countries use when they're compiling their tax treaties. Are they being fair when they say, let's say they're saying capital gains tax, the source country gets 10% and the resident country gets 5%? Are they being fair, looking at the fact that the property that is being sold is from a developed country, or the property that is being sold is in the resident country? When I say resident country, I mean the residence of the person who's selling the property.
Now, Rebecca, let me then check again.
Okay.
Just this is just an indulgence for the sake of us understanding your problem state. So, what is the research problem, or what is the topic that you are researching? So, in other words, when I look at your work, that it's within the text of the OECD, but actually focusing more on the issues of tax. What is the research problem that you are, or is it, in a question mark or in a statement? That's fine. Just give it to me. You may not have it right now, but you may have just a sense of what it is.
Oh, okay. So basically, it's saying. Let me just read it.
Yeah, just read for it, because I'm curious. Yeah. I'm curious also to listen to the. I mean, if you talk of countries, you're talking about more than 200.
Yes.
Okay. Please go ahead.
And you know what I did? It's opening. Sorry, I didn't want to focus on maybe 2 specific countries where I do a comparative. I wanted to do countries in general, because this thing affects every country. Tax treaties are in every country.
No, sure.
Yeah.
But my curiosity, where I'm curious is if you look at the population. In other words, when you are now going to look at countries, you're going to say, how many countries do you have in the world? Is more than 200 countries.
Yeah.
Thereabout. Now, I'm interested to check how do you sample them? Do you look at all of them? Do you group them? Because you've got developed, you've got underdeveloped, and you've got poor countries. So I want to see how, because all of those countries could have their own tax regimes and whatever they. So that's where my interest is, to say, what is it that you're looking at? Because you may not talk to the Russians and you're not talking to the Australians, and so how that I'm interested in that as well. But before we get there, I just wanted to understand what is your topic?
Oh, okay. The topic says the international tax treaties in double tax agreements, their effectiveness in the equitable allocation of taxing rights for source states. Now, when we say source states, that's a country where the income is coming from. The income has been generated. The income that is going to be taxed. Yes. So the opposite would be the resident state. The resident state would be the country where the taxpayer is coming from.
Yeah.
So the source state.
So which one? Your focus is not on the resident state, isn't it? The perspective you're coming from, is it for both?
Yes, it's for both. So, I'm focusing on, is those laws, are they fair on source states, like when they're negotiating the tax treaties, or let's say, for example, the convention between South Africa and Canada. I just do, because I've got a chapter which compares the convention of Canada and South Africa to see whether their tax treaty is fair to a developing country. So I don't really focus on a specific country. I say developing countries and developed countries.
But this is where my interest is piqued, right? Because now I'm thinking to myself, and please help me, get me right on this one. I mean, if I'm getting it all wrong, just correct me.
Okay.
This is where I'm getting interested to say, how do you begin to say, like the scoping? Do you look at South Africa, Canada, and the next thing you will be looking at America, New Zealand? How do you select? How do you see? Because it's different. Yeah. Okay.
With these countries, I'm not focusing on just one country. I'm picking any country, but as examples. Let's say when I want to talk about where one country took so much from another country, I'll just speak from any countries that I know that did that, and then I put the example.
What do you call technically that random picking up of country is? How do you, within a research context, how do you explain that? I'm just, that's where I just want to get it in right so that we don't say the wrong things here. So you can randomly pick up Zimbabwe being really taken advantage of by, say, a country such as Russia or China, for example.
Yeah.
So, but I'm interested in that selection. How do you do it?
Or you would look at the tax treaty or the double tax agreement between Russia and Zimbabwe.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the selection criteria that you came to it. Is it sampling wise? Was there a methodology that you are following, where you then say, I'll look, because you can't just, even if it's random, but you'll have an idea of, whether you're going to do Pakistan and Ukraine, for example, or Palestina and, so I'm interested in that methodology of selection.
Okay.
What was it? How?
The way that I selected between developed countries and developing countries.
Oh, so you'll have like developed countries on the one side and developing countries on the other side.
Yes.
So you'll have a grouping of all developed countries, and you can randomly pick Germany and say Malawi.
Yes.
But okay, so you see, that's what I'm trying to get to, because I'm trying to understand the methodology up to the point where you sample or you select and you analyze.
Okay.
So if you were to pick, let's just use this funny example, Germany and Malawi, for example. So you then say Malawi will be a poor country, which means it will go into developing countries.
Yes.
And you pick Germany, and then you identify a treaty in that regard.
Yes.
So that process on its own, right? How that process of arriving at the picking up of a country, both the developing and the developed. How did you go about that?
Well, for example, with mine, I picked South Africa and Canada. Okay. South Africa, obviously, I picked because I'm in South Africa. And then Canada, I picked it because it's a developing country, and some of its laws are sort of, I think it's got common law. I'm not sure why I picked it, but I picked it because it's a developing country, and I liked Canada, so it wasn't difficult.
Oh, so it could have been France.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't. So it could have been France, South Africa, or I see.
It was just I just picked a developed and developing so that people can, as an example, to see what I'm talking about. Is it surely are developing countries being treated unfairly, or is it just a perception that people have? Let's take a look at these two countries and see.
Okay, so what was your, and again, please don't get it wrong. All we are just saying is just to have a conversation openly. So what was your sampling strategy? Because I'm now looking at 200 plus countries seated together, then you split them into developed and developing countries so that you could randomly pick up a particular treaty and see France, Canada, South Africa on a particular area. And, what strategy did you apply to select, to do that? You remember you do have the treaties already. They are existing.
Yes.
So you are looking at these treaties and the fairness and the unfairness of both developed and developing countries. I understand that. But what I want to know now is, if you were to pick up Canada, for example, I mean, you like Canada is first world. It could have been the States, could have been any other. And then you compare it and you realize that this is in this particular area of taxation, there is unfairness. So I want to know, how did you arrive at that? Am I making myself?
Like, how did I arrive at picking Canada particularly?
Yes, remember you picked South Africa. It's convenient. You live here. You picked in Canada, but my understanding is that you are not just looking at just one aspect of that. You picked Canada and South Africa on that area, and on that area that you are researching. And then the next one, maybe you picked another country on a different area, or am I getting it wrong?
When you say
you did one
on a different area, what do you mean? Because the
a different area. For example, Canada, South Africa is on a certain area or taxation that you are looking at, and maybe another developing country and South Africa on a different area, or you just picked one area?
No, I just picked one area.
So it will be like Canada, South Africa on a particular area?
Yes, the area which is comparing whether South Africa is being, what can I say, swindled by Canada on sharing taxes.
Yes.
Yeah, on sharing
as a source state, maybe
taxes.
As a source state or as a resident state.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a bit confused, but
okay. No, I'm gonna give you a break now just to take water. It's just that you are anchoring our discussion today because I mean you were picked randomly. There was no formula. I just picked you. So,
okay.
so what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to get to finally, Rebecca, is did you look at Canada and South Africa only on that one element of the treaty of tax treaty, or were there other scenarios in your research where you looked at other countries, two countries, developing and developed countries, or this is just one of the areas that you focused on? Earlier on, I thought it's different tax regimes that you are looking at from developing and developed countries, and you're looking at whether or not there has been some unfairness in them. But it looks, is it one or is it more than one?
It's just one, if I understand your question correctly, because I've got about 7 chapters, and one of them where there's a comparative study, that's where I put South Africa and Canada, what I'm explaining now. So the whole thesis is not just about Canada and South Africa or comparing the two. The whole thesis is talking about the international tax principles, which are the laws that countries use to create their tax treaties.
Okay. Oh, so you also looked at just the laws, that's country. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when I used South Africa and Canada, they were just examples of a developed country and a developing country to see whether truly what other authors are talking about, saying that developed countries are being taken advantage of by the by the big countries. Is it true? So then I would look at each and every article in that tax treaty or in that tax agreement to see whether, oh yeah, for sure, I see here Article 5 gives Canada more taxing rights, and yet that income comes from South Africa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So so in your I don't want to say preliminary findings, maybe they are just so in your findings, you are able to confirm the unfairness of the developing countries over the developed countries over the developing countries on that element.
Yes, I can, but I haven't finished. because I'm still in the process, because then when the comments came back from the examiners, they were like, it's like you've already made a conclusion that, developed countries are taking advantage of the developing countries before you've actually gone into detail. So now what I'm doing is to actually going into detail so that I can give a conclusion. Because
so
now
your data, your collection of data was based on articles. Am I right?
Yes.
Like
yes.
documents.
Yes, documents. Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay. So these documents that you are using as your source of data, right? What are they? Are they like your journal? What, just give it to me. Like, how did you identify the source documents that you are now saying, these I'm going to rely on to just for your findings, because it's collection of data, then you analyze, then you interpret. What kind of documents are those?
Well, they're mainly articles.
The what?
Articles, like from journals.
Journal articles. Okay.
Yes, and textbooks and conventions, obviously conventions like the OECD and the UN and the tax agreements of countries.
Oh, okay. So that's like you used documents to as your data collection. So
yes.
Was there a particular grouping? I don't know. I may not be using the right word. Please pardon me. But Is there particular, because if you are using articles, there could be thousands and millions of documents that you can access. But how did you then say these are the documents that I'm going to rely on because of their, whatever you are going to use as your measurement of the validity, authenticity, and so on? How did you identify that these documents, these articles, is it? I mean, some might say, no, I only looked at them from a year point of view, that they should be recent or whatever. I'm trying to get into your brain. How did you?
Yeah, I was mostly looking at the recent ones, or the ones that have special information that you cannot get in maybe a normal article or in a textbook. So you would find that some of them are very old articles, like maybe from 2000, but it has specific information that other articles don't have. But mostly they are most recent ones, because tax law changes every time. You don't want to take something from 2000 only to find out that the law on that particular information has changed. So it's mostly the new ones. And if it's an old one, it's because it's got specific information that you cannot find in the new articles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have a sip of water, Rebecca. We'll come back to you maybe, but if not, please just take note that we are using this also as an example for our engagement, and I hope you don't mind. So it's like you're defending your thesis today.
All right. No problem, Professor.
Okay, but thanks for sharing. Again, in the spirit of this engagement. But please jump in if there's anything that you want to add, because if you are at the point of corrections, I'm sure you've done a huge amount of work already where, some of the discussion that we might have here may have been overtaken by where you were. Now, I just thought, today again, that let's be reminded of what we are trying to achieve in the work that we do. And again, this I'm saying with so much respect that a lot of work, is already covered in many respects in a proposal. But there is nothing wrong in appreciating that when you deal with a proposal, we go forward, we come back, you fix, so that's what we are doing now. Because we are interested in the scientific part of the work that we do, let us be reminded of what are those principles. So I was trying to establish in this conversation with Rebecca now, I was trying to establish what are the scientific elements that have guided the research process. And I think in the answering, because this is really picking up a person on the spot, so we can't really be harsh on Rebecca. I was trying to get the the systematic observation on everything else that she's doing. Because remember, we said last time when we met that if you look at the difference between scientific and non-scientific, it's really because of some of the principles, one of which is the authority that, I've been working in this area, therefore I have power, I am the CEO, I've got authority, over all this. So it's not necessarily scientific, but it's authority. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. Remember, we say non-scientific and scientific doesn't mean wrong. It just means you need to understand and appreciate what makes them different. Opinion of peers. What are your peers saying about the phenomenon that you're discussing with them? It's not wrong to get and understand and appreciate their opinions, but at the same time, it's not necessarily scientific, right? I mean, I can rely on the opinions that you're giving, but it does not necessarily mean, it's scientific. And that also, I'm saying, is not wrong. It's just to say it's opinion. Traditions, this is how we do things here. This is how we've been doing things here. And this is how we're going to continue doing them. It's traditions. This is the way in which we do things. We all inherit them. We bring them, we grow up with them. With some of them we bring, it's within the environment within which we live. There's nothing wrong with them. It's traditions. It's just not necessarily scientific. The debating, I mean, there's a lot of debates that is going on, in our lives. Again, remember, you can have a good debate, but that does not necessarily translate into, science. But there's nothing wrong with the debate. Again, we debate, we argue whether it was good or bad for the President of the Republic of South Africa to go to the Oval Office. Those are debates, but eventually, it's views and opinions, but at the same time, they are not necessarily scientific. It's just opinions. But again, ladies and gentlemen, the message here is not about who's right, who's wrong. Then there is accidental observation. I mean, you saw this, driving to Joburg every day, you accidentally, bump into this, and then all of a sudden you want to make, some conclusions about it. Nothing wrong, just accidental. I don't know how much or how deep the problem is, but I see it. Now, what makes that scientific different from that is that your observation on this element will be, on this page will be systematic. So in other words, you are intentional in what you want to look into. I mean, Rebecca was saying, I'm intentional. I'm looking at developing countries as they compare the tax regime to the developed countries. But you see, that's intentional. It says, there could be a whole lot of other areas of study within the OECD, but also within the Vienna Conventions. But I'm not going to look at all those. I just want to observe how the relationship, especially on the tax regime, works for the developing and the developed countries. So therefore, that's my focus, and that's what I'm going to be obsess myself with from a scientific point of view. So it could be systematic. We can go into it, have more discussion around it, but that's what, she is interested in. And secondly is control. And this is where I want to know, how much of this did you control that one day you don't have Bangladesh coming in? And then it's like, oh, now that, so there's control. Like, I'm not here to study anything else. This is what I'm looking at. Because with research, you control the environment within which you're studying. And then there's a replication. Replication simply means if I follow the journey, the path that you have carved for yourself, research-wise, I should arrive at the same conclusion. So in other words, if I take Rebecca on her own statement of the international tax environment that she is studying, and she gives me the methodology, the processes within which she followed, the sampling, the population, everything else, and I follow that, I should be able to come to the same conclusion. Because then I followed a methodology that she has put together for all of us to see. So in other words, when I look at the international tax principle, I should be able to say, looking at the developed and the developing countries, my conclusion should be pretty much the same. It's almost like using a procedure or a procedure which outline or steps that I follow these steps, I must come to the same conclusion. Of course, there's a possibility that you may have some amendments, adjustment, alterations, but that will talk to when we talk about internal validity. That as to why is it that I follow your processes, everything else, but then I come to the different conclusion, which is the reason why I wanted to know from her as an example, which sources of information are you relying on, so that I don't use 1948 and she said, no, but I didn't use those sources. Now it's like, oh, okay. Please outline the parameters within which you did this work. Why? So that if I follow the same process that she's telling me, I should come to the same conclusion. Now, this is what we're trying to push and, to engage her on, so that I can understand what are the possibilities of a replication of this study. Because if you don't define the scope and the processes in the way that I can follow, then it's problematic. Now, when we look at the research proposal, really it's just about outlining all those processes so that I follow them, I come to the same conclusion. Of course, as I said, you are not obsessed about coming to the same conclusion, because things can differ. And the reason why you may have influence over time, we know that there's history, there's time, and a whole lot of examples that we could use. So at that point, when everything else is the way it's supposed to be, I should come to the same conclusion. So those are the three principles, if you like, or elements that we rely on when we talk about science: systematic observation, control, and of course, replication. If I cannot reproduce your work, I need to look at what was it? What is it about the literature? Is it about the process? Is it about the method, or whatever it is? So that's very, very important in research, ladies and gentlemen. Now, you are at the level where you put together your dissertation or your thesis. So the process of doing that, it's really universally defined. So you can go to the sources and you can use anything that you find very helpful for yourself. But again, it's not about whether or not, this one is better or the other, but it's just about what works for you. Now, I prefer that we take this discussion, but then you go out and you look for what works for you. Because, some people have a mind map situation, others want a narrative and so on. So it's just about what works for you. However, we are looking at the literature review. Today we're trying to look at literature review, and I'm glad that Rebecca was raising that to say I use journal article. We'll come to that just now. But you see, when you look at the structure, in the main, there will be elements that are the same. Maybe they're just been defined or emphasized differently. When you look at the literature review, of course, then there's a theoretical framework. There's a current state of knowledge, what is known in the space. There are research gaps. In other words, everything is known, but where is the gap? How do you know that? You know it when you start engaging the literature relevant to the topic that you are studying. And then the key concepts. Now, the key concept for me is what I was trying to get her to tell me, because I can define international text principle differently. So if she tells me, if I say, what do you mean by international text principle? I wanted to define it to me having gone through literature, so that when I read the information, the report that she's presenting to me, I know what I'm going through. Otherwise, concepts can be defined differently. We used an example in one of our engagement to say, let's define youth. And it became clearer that the definitions can vary, but at some point, you as a researcher, you need to come to a point where you tell us, this is what a youth is. We'll come back to the definition of concept just now. But let's look at why do we do literature review, and also just to understand these concepts. We do it because, amongst others, is to make sure that we share results of other studies that are closely related to the one that we are doing. So in other words, before you do your own study, you want to scan and read a little bit about, or more, maybe not even a little bit, more about what is already known in the field that you are interested to study, so that you can relate, your study to the larger, the ongoing, dialogues in the literature, filling gaps. Now, there is no study over the world which will not have gaps that you would identify and you can fill up. I mean, research is an ongoing exercise that has to happen all the time. Now, if you read research reports or you read articles, they will always point you to the future research that needs to be done, because you can't be exhaustive when you do research. There's always an opportunity for further studies to be done. Now, you can imagine in this day and age where we are, if you did some research 10 years ago, you can imagine what is happening today. I mean, there were no AIs, the advancement of the apps and technology, and. So today's study will always, identify gaps, the studies that might have been done a few years ago. I mean, few years, just about, 8 years, 5 years, 3 years ago, we had COVID. Now, life changed completely. So somebody who lived before COVID, if they wake up today, they'll be surprised on some of the changes that have happened over time. And I'm talking about the global implication and impact of changes that we've gone through. Again, the literature review provides you with a framework for establishing the importance of your study. So when you do literature review, the more you review, and survey more literature, is the more you can identify the niche that your own study is able to provide. And of course, you benchmark that with the results that are already available. So you're able to pick up basically the major studies on the research problem. So you can actually tell these are the major studies that they've done. I mean, if I were to ask Rebecca now about studies that were done on the international tax principle and the fact that there is some unevenness and the inequality or unequal treatment of the tax situation for developing and developed countries, I'm sure she would agree. But I'm sure even if you were just to look at the developed countries themselves between and amongst each other, she might also pick up what is happening in that regard. So it is important to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that when you do your own research work, and for you who have already done this, I'm sure you'll relate to the area of literature review. How important is it to your study? We're not going to go into the discussion now as to how much you should do literature for qualitative and how much you should do for quantitative. But suffice to say, in a quantitative arena, you do more literature review because you're also going to use that maybe to formulate your hypothesis and develop your questionnaires and so on. Whilst in a qualitative, you don't necessarily have to go extensive in your literature review. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do literature review in your study. So it doesn't matter which approach you're following, literature review is quite important in this regard.
I've heard people keep saying that quantitative, qualitative. I don't really know the difference.
What do you think?
No, I'm saying, can you please explain to me what it is and the difference? Because I'm hearing you saying quantitative and qualitative. So
yes, I hear you. But okay. Yes, I hear you well, Rebecca. But what I like, with students already is, and please, again, I just want to appeal. You have an idea, and we just need to build on it, because theoretically we'll explain. And for me, what I would prefer is, even if we have explained it theoretically, it must sit in you that you understand it, because those are universal approaches that we should all know, right?
Okay.
So let me hear what you think about that before we come back to the literature review. You have an idea. What comes to your mind?
Okay. Quantitative, I think that it's the one that I'm doing, where I just look at, I'm doing my research, looking at other people's work that has already been researched. And then qualitative would be where people actually go into the field and do the research themselves. Like maybe you're going to a hospital, doing taking information from patients and nurses and stuff like that. than to just take information from a book.
When you
or
say
from
take,
an
I'm sure
article.
you mean, when you say take, I don't think you mean take. I think you mean collect, right? As in
Yes.
interview people, because when you take, it sounds.
Yeah, I mean collect.
Yeah, but I hear you. I hear you when you say you take from patients. It's like, wow, no, don't take anything from patients. But I hear you, Rebecca.
Okay.
Let's hold it there, because you've asked two questions. Well, I've asked my question and you answered with your question. So let's go back. Let's listen to what other students are saying. Qualitative, quantitative, literature review. Let them pick what they want to deal with for now before we, because it's important. We will talk to both of them right away anyway. So,
all right.
So no stress. You want to get clarity on qualitative and quantitative, and you've said what you have to say about your own situation. Rescuers, we've got issues around literature review or qualitative and quantitative. Which one is it going to be for you? What would you rather rescue? Who do you rescue first, myself or Rebecca?
Pardon?
I said there are two issues that are right now discussed, which is literature review, the importance thereof, or Rebecca wants to understand qualitative and quantitative. Which one would you rather tackle?
Yeah, I'm not sure because I'm still learning and listening, but I think around my understanding of qualitative and then quantitative research is that I think you are dealing with the whole information that is there. And then I'll make an example with numbers. Numbers can be, if I get a whole range of numbers or data, it will be more quantitative. But if I process that data, it may result to that qualitative kind of aspect of a research. So that's how I understand it, so that at least if we are making an example with numbers, what is behind those numbers that I think can make a change or an impact in terms of what I'm doing and then wanting to achieve a sort of, because I think information is there. What are the gaps so that the data, I'm able to identify data and process the data that is there to be to take me to a qualitative outcome. That's what maybe one can actually understand broadly. Yeah.
Oh, okay. What in your own situation, Michael? What are you? Where are you in the research studies? Are you?
Yeah.
Have you done your proposal, or you said you are learning? That was what you said.
I'm listening. I learn by listening, but
I said,
in terms of my own research, I think my proposal was approved. As is, I think I'm doing LLM, and then through human rights, through coursework, and then now I'm busy collecting and tackling chapter 2 of my mini thesis, and then that's where I am, I think, and so on. Yeah.
What is chapter 2 about? What does it entail?
It is an overview based on my the current topic. That is the
what is your topic, Michael?
It has to do with a review of government's approach, the government approach on a participatory democracy and meaningful engagement in South Africa.
Wow.
So I think it's more tilted towards the adequate housing as a socio-economic right, and so on.
So what is your hypothesis? If you say government approach, what are you looking at there?
Yeah, the government approach, I think the example here is around the adequate housing as a right. But I think what is really happening is that I think is more the approach is that I think people are unable, or there's no capacity or the clear understanding, or there's a gap to say how people are able to participate, because participatory democracy is very broad. People must be able to make decisions on the type of housing they have. But I think in government, the government practice currently is that I think you will be waiting for that RDP house. Government will come and deliver. And then
okay, hold a bit there, Michael. Let's engage you a bit, because we want to come back to literature review and the qualitative and whose government. When you say government, how do you define government then? Because for me, I would only be able to relate when you say whose government in this context.
Yeah, government.
Because you say government approach, right?
Yeah, the government approach.
Yeah, whose government? Who are you looking at when you say government?
South African government, the way they're approaching, I think it will be
No,
more.
I'm saying when you say, I'm saying define for me government. Whose government? I understand you're talking about government, but you're not talking about Brazil or India. You're talking about South Africa. But I want to know whose government.
South African government.
No. Yeah, I hear you. I'm saying when you say government, who do you mean? Who's this?
Is a government.
The government approach is
there's a Department of Housing, for instance, or Human Settlements. But government's, I think, approach, is with regard to all the three spheres of government. But the most importantly is the national government and the provincial government that are delivering houses.
Michael, I want to know, when you say you are government, what do you mean? In other words, what is your definition of government? So when you say government approach, remember it's a government approach, participatory democracy, and you look at housing. So when you talk to government, when you say you wanna focus on government, who is government? What is government? Or what is the focus here? If I want to say government, what do you mean?
I'm talking about the body that has been elected by the very same people to govern the country. But I think there are different departments that are responsible for human settlements and housing broadly.
Okay,
but also
you're following. Are you following my drift on the question that I'm asking? Is that you need to be clear on your definition, therefore.
Yes.
To say, government, are you talking about, because remember, government is people as well. They say government of the people, by the people, for the people. Yes. While perhaps you say, no, I'm actually focusing on the elected, public representative. But then you're also talking about the Department of Housing. Do you realize that?
I take it as part of the government, because also the parliament is still government. But I'm talking about the executive in the main.
But remember, in research, remember, you may not be talking cabinet, you might not be talking parliament, you might not be talking the three spheres, as you say. You might be talking a department.
Yes.
Because now you say with particular focus on housing.
Yeah, is the executive authority that I'm looking at, executive arm of government.
No. What I mean is, just remember now, there's you might change your, over time, obviously, you might change your approach, your topic, so that is more researchable. Because if you say to me, government approach on participative democracy, it's very broad. I mean, then the next thing you might be saying, no, I meant municipality, and municipalities now go as far as all the 9 provinces. Now you said, no, I actually didn't mean all the 9 provinces. I meant the House of the National Council of Provinces. No, I actually meant the premiers. Or do you see what it means when you don't? You're not specific on your topic as well.
Yeah.
So it's not about really criticizing you, but it's just to say, be careful how you craft your topic, because the way you do it, it must be so simple and easy. This may not be the right way, but it must be clear for you that you can actually identify what we will call units of analysis. What is your study? Because if you say government approach, now and thousands of approaches, because Modimolle municipality might have a different approach than Mhlabwe. You understand? And then maybe that's also different from how Gqeberha approaches the same issue. So again, it's just to say who's, then there are also government. So just be careful how you define government in that context. Like I said, I mean, government, you say it's a body, but then there's elected, but then there are 3 spheres, but then there's an executive. So you see it moves. Now, if you are going to have to measure that, it might be difficult.
Yeah, I think maybe I understand what was, because where I started moving from is that I think the way I think I moved from, maybe that is taking me to literature, to say I think there's a generally housing problem in South Africa, and then practically the approach of a general government around housing is a provision of housing, I think, as a right, but the way it's done, I think, is that I think people must.
You see now, you are formulating it. You are formulating it much more in a specific way. That the approach of the housing problem, by obviously it could be the departments that are assigned the responsibility to provide housing. Right?
Because I think
so how they approach the problem.
So that I think we are not able to, people are not participating, taking those decisions. But I'm comparing that with those who are able to define, because the problem is more around people who need those housing becoming passive recipient. While I think there are areas, I think there's one area, Thembalethu in Mildredrift, people actually defined their own RDPs, started to contribute towards building their own houses, working together with the government departments and all the government. And then, so those are gaps that I'm saying, but I understand that I think we need from the start to be more specific, but it's generally the approach of government.
If you use the word, once you use government, it might mean many things to many people, right? And that could also create difficulty for you to define the concepts, because we have to measure. Your research must be measurable. I mean, the results must be, if you are focusing on a specific community, yet it's government, and I'm asking you from eThekwini. Now it's like, no, but I'm not, there's no way that I would know. Now, this discussion is just to say, be intentional on how you'd like to define certain concepts that are relevant to what you are doing. But the point is made. I think you're following what these questions were driving, the point that we are driving, right? You're getting the message.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
No, thanks. Let's come back to the literature review. I think Rebecca is still waiting.
So when we are talking quantitative, my understanding is that we are talking people's feelings, we are talking opinions, whereas when we are talking qualitative, we are talking numbers. That is my understanding.
Whereas when we are talking
qualitative,
we are talking numbers.
Yes.
Is it not the other way? Is it not the other way around?
I might be saying the other way around. Yeah.
Quantitative has to do more with numbers. In other words, the larger sample, the closed questions, like your yes and no's, the measurement, like questionnaires. But qualitative will have to do with the smaller sample. Yes, about the opinions of people or their thoughts, but also interviews, small interviews, and so on. So in essence, when you see, if I'm doing a survey about 300 people, which is what I was thinking, maybe Rebecca has done. I mean, 200 countries is quite a lot. You may then do quantitative, which is the number, statistics, and so on. Whilst if you're doing qualitative, it could be smaller, sample, few people being interviewed, their views, their ideas being considered. And therefore, instruments will differ. Like I'm saying, quantitative, you can use a questionnaire. We will be discussing those approaches soon. But if you then go qualitative, it means you are not going to have a large sample. Now, if you go a large sample and you're saying it's qualitative, it's a bit problematic, because qualitative, not big sample, whilst quantitative is sample. So you can look at it from a sample size, that the bigger the size, the quantitative approach it is. Now, the questionnaire is the one that you use because, I mean, it's very difficult to talk to 600 people at any given stage. So a questionnaire could be. So it does not necessarily mean, if it's qualitative, it's good or it's bad. These are just approaches for now, because I don't want us to be stuck in that. When I was listening to Rebecca talking, because he said, I'm not going to talk to people, I was thinking to myself, maybe she's only going to rely on, few people that is going to interview for an in-depth understanding of the problem. But then she said, no, I've just, identified documents that I'm relying on. Now, I was tossed between, what is it? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? But then she comes back and say, please talk to me about qualitative and quantitative. Whilst I was thinking, what is it? Is it about just a reliance on document, no questionnaires and no interviews, even if it's about 2-3 people? So just be mindful of the difference between qualitative and quantitative technically now. But I'm sure when we delve into it, we can even move that to an earlier time so that we clear it as soon as possible, if that will be the need. I mean, we adapt as we move along. But yeah, I hope that gives some kind of an indication of the differences between the two. You can use both quantitative and qualitative in your research work. And when you do that, we will then start talking about mixed methods. So which means you're using both qualitative and quantitative. You can use both, as well. Then you can collect both qualitative and quantitative data at the same time, So, but I think for now, perhaps let's not get deeper into it, but, just have a sense of what makes the two different. Rebecca, sorry, I know that I have not done justice to this, but maybe I've given you something to think about.
Yes, maybe let me just ask. So are you saying, Professor, that I'm supposed to interview someone like in my situation?
No, I'm not saying that. No, I wasn't saying that. I was just saying I wanted to know how. Remember, I was asking you earlier on about the sampling. In other words, I was looking at countries that are more than 200, and I said, how did you select them? Because the selection criteria also has an impact on which approach you are following, and therefore which sample you are going. Because if you are going to sample qualitatively, it's different from sampling quantitatively. So I wanted to know, is it about numbers or not numbers? So I was not able to get into that, but again, it was just that maybe is my limited understanding of the area you are talking about. So I'm not saying interview. I would say when you collect, I wanted to know, how do you collect data? Because at the end of the day, when we do research is about collection of data, right? That's what it is. And it's about analysis of data, right? And then the interpretation of data. So when we define research, really is we say it's a systematic collection of data and the analysis of data and the interpretation of data. So how you collect data matters. Because if you say, an example you gave earlier was, let's say maybe we are focusing on patients in a hospital. You then say you can either collect the information or data from patients through various ways. There are instruments to do so. Maybe you are going to collect data by interviewing people or by giving them questionnaires to fill or whatever. So there is a way within which data must be collected. So I was asking along those lines to say, how are you going to collect data? So in other words, how are you going to collect relevant data for you to come to an analysis and an interpretation? So you then said, no, I'm using journals or articles in journals. Now, that is how you're collecting data, because you can also collect documentary evidence and rely on it for analysis and interpretation. I think that's what I was hearing you say. But we didn't delve deeper into it because I was worried that I don't want to lose you on populations, sampling strategies, probability or non-probability, and so on. So for me, it was just to get a sense of what you are doing from a problem statement point of view or topic, choosing a topic point of view.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, we'll move quicker to get into qualitative and quantitative so that you don't get lost as soon as possible. But for now, we are still really grappling with the conceptualization, literature review, and maybe just to assist those that are at the earlier stages of their proposal. Apologies about just running rough shots on this important area that you're asking about. Let's just go back to the literature review information. There are uses, in other words, there are benefits of doing literature review in your research project. When you do research, apart from the purpose of doing it, you need to understand that there are uses that the literature review serve. One of which is that it integrates what others have done and said, and it also criticizes previous scholarly work. So you are able to say, maybe I studied this, but I did not consider the following. As you said earlier on, I think it was you, Rebecca, saying the tax regime changes quite rapidly. So you need to be able to keep up with the criticism, because if I studied the tax regime before China became what it is now, I could have a different perspective today, from a trade economic point of view, to build bridges between related topics as well, that you're able to build bridges between the tax information and of course the equity issues that you are raising. That you can do, but you can do more, and to identify the central issues in a field. So you're able to say, this is the treaties that have been entered into, but the central issue here is the way in which perhaps the distribution of the tax revenue are done in the different countries, as an example, or continents, or whatever it is that you work with. So it's an integrated analysis of what is known. So basically, when you look at the literature review, what you're doing is you integrate what is already known and you analyze that to say, this is what is known, this is what is there from the, but you do that work because you have read through it yourself. So you've studied and you have really engaged the literature as well. Now, when you talk literature, we mean reading material that is related to your research and of course then the current state of knowledge that is existing in the field. Interestingly, and I use this quite a lot because I do engage students, and sometimes they said, I'm being asked to do to conduct literature review. What does that mean? And I think for you, Rebecca, this is the time where you'd say, oh no, now you can sleep, because it's like, no, but I know I've done literature review. But anyway, for those of you who have not yet done literature review, we just use this as a guide that, get to know what is it that it means for your own understanding of the steps. Now, if somebody says, your promoter said, you need to now I've seen your topic, please go ahead, do literature review. It could be or conduct literature review. It could be a very overwhelming chapter of the work that you want to do, because then what does that mean? Now, here what you're trying to do, really, ladies and gentlemen, and you can read as many as possible, sources that can talk to this. We're just trying to assist you in knowing what needs to be done. And again, my best bet for me is that always, talk to your librarian, community librarians, university librarians. They are so useful in this regard, because that's the work that they do to support your research work. But, just go there knowing this is somebody who's there employed to assist me to collect as much information as I can. The first thing that you can look at is you have to identify what we call keywords. Keywords in your own study, so that when you go to a library or you go to a website or whatever, you have keywords that will guide you. I mean, as I was listening to you, Rebecca, I was asking myself, what are the keywords, that I'll use to search the material that might be useful for me. So you have keywords that will emerge when you identify a topic, or maybe from your preliminary readings. If I were to ask Rebecca, for you, what was or what is some of the keywords that you used in your, just from a topic that we engaged on? Any idea of the keywords?
Let me just look at mine here. I'll just read them out. So, for example, I've got international text principles, and then I've got effectiveness, equitable, model text convention, double text agreements, treaty, developed countries, taxing rights, active income, passive income, source state, resident state, etc.
Yes, so those are your keywords, which means you can have international text principle, equity. You can have all those as your keywords, because they are guiding you on how and what to search, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so it's important, ladies and gentlemen. I wanted to use that as a keyword so that you have an understanding that there are keywords that need to be built. And just listening to, when we were earlier on, when we were also, so Michael was talking about government approaches and so on. So when I was just listening to that, it will be government approaches, housing and all. So you need to have keywords, because you can't just search everything. You need to have keywords that you would use to guide you on your searches. So I think that which you are sharing with us, Rebecca, is helpful. Now, this is just to say, this is the first thing that you can do for all of you students that are going to do literature review. And those that have done literature review, if you have had keywords and you didn't know what it is, that's exactly what it is, so that it assists you in searching literature. The second thing is, you can use your computer to search databases. I am aware that most of the universities and also communities do have, computerized databases that they use, which is also meant, well, depending on those that have got licensing and so on, they do purchase licenses so that students can have access to journals and so on. Now, you can also then, once you've got the keyword, then you can start searching using those computerized database. I use a lot of Google Scholar because, again, I mean, you can use it on the phone, smartphone, Wi-Fi. You don't necessarily need a lot of, data or licensing and so on. And again, it's because of its easy accessibility for many people. So Google Scholar is, for me, a very good site to use on the databases. But please remember, we're talking Google Scholar. So as an academic, yourself as a researcher, you need to be thinking about moving out of Google into Google Scholar, because that's very, very important. and then the Web of Science, the EBSCO, the ProQuest, and so on. So these are just some of the computerized databases that are available. But as I said, some of them would require licenses, so you just need to check with your library and the university as to are they available, because they may also attract some charges in them. Then you locate your reports or your research articles or your books, that are related to your topic. So now you're able to sit with a whole lot of material that talks to what the topic is all about. And of course, then you have a duty to skim through all those articles in order to collect those that are central to your topic. So now you're sitting with a room full of books, but also a computer full of articles. So now you're not going to go through all of them at any given stage. So what do? You look at those that are more relevant to your topic. And in some instances, you also have to look at the years at which they are done, because if they're too old, again, you may find that perhaps working with your own supervisor and your own promoter, just check. Because in some instances, you don't have to go over 10 years sources when you can have a 2025, 2024, 23 sources. So just be careful there as you skim through your articles. Then you can then set up or design your literature map. I'm going to start with the articles, the books, and so on, put all that together, because then it's just a visual picture that illustrates how your particular study will add to the existing literature. So you're already saying, I want to see how fair and unfair are the developing countries to the, in terms of how they treat, how they are treated by the developed countries, But you already have in your mind some kind of a hypothesis, because you're already saying there is unfairness in the way the developed countries are treating the less developed countries. So basically, you, as a research student, you already have some hypothesis. So you already want to know, to test the extent to which that which is an assumption is true in the real sense of the word. So that's exactly what you do when you work through your map. And then you begin to draft summaries of the most relevant articles. So you realize maybe the ones that are more or they're 10 years, less than 10 years are the most relevant ones. So you put them together because you also want to start somewhere. Otherwise, you can be overwhelmed when you don't have a plan. I mean, this is not a must do in the same way, but it's just some guideline on how you can do it. Then you have to assemble the literature review, where you structure your review, thematically, and also in terms of the important concept. I can see you saying, okay, the first thing maybe is the introduction, the definitions, the overview. Now, as you go through the material, you're able to set it together to create some thematic or organize them in terms of concept. And of course, then you can end with summary of the major themes. What is emerging? As you read through the information, what is coming up, models, the negotiation processes, and so on and so forth. Developing countries, what does it mean? Less developed countries, what does it mean? Those concepts are now defined differently, and you always have to, then you putting them together in a manner that it makes it easier for you to outline your literature review. Then you can suggest at that point how your study now adds to the literature, or how does it address the gap. So having read all that material, I know that in some instances you'll be asked to read not less than 200 sources, for example. Now you're able to say, where does your study fit into everything else, So you now have a gap that you've identified, and you realize that perhaps that which you're going to do will fit into any of those gaps that you are filling in. What is extremely important in a literature review, over and above you having to understand more of the other authors and scholars relating to your topic, what becomes more crucial and important is the referencing. Now, there are different styles of referencing. I don't think you'll write an examination on the different styles. What is important for you to understand here is that you will be required to use referencing, and you'll be given specifically by your promoter which reference style they use. If it's Harvard, that means you're going to stick to Harvard. That is the referencing style that will be used, and you need to be very aware and clear on that. You can't use different referencing style in your research project. That one moment you're on American Psychological Service, Association, then you move to Chicago. It doesn't work like that. Once you use one referencing style, that is the one that you're going to do for your citation. This is very important, ladies and gentlemen, because if you don't know which referencing style to use, you may actually use a multiple of styles, and that may attract, that you have to do a lot of corrections. And at that point, you may have lost maybe some of the material that you are referring to. So it can be quite a stressful situation for students. Now, let me just check quickly. Why is referencing so important, even at the point of literature review as it is in research? Why do you think it's such an important aspect of research?
I think, like, for example, maybe when the examiners are looking at your work, sometimes they'll want to confirm whether the information that you put is correct. I don't know. That's what I think.
Okay. Yes, that's not wrong. That's very, yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah,
that's
also,
one of the reasons. Confirm.
The referencing assist in terms of acknowledging the source to avoid plagiarism, taking other people's ideas, making them as yours.
Brilliant. That's also true that this also to avoid correct referencing also help to avoid plagiarism, but also increase the quality of your work, because then you're acknowledging the good work done by others, which is assisting you to acquire your own knowledge. So it's brilliant. I agree. Zui, what do you think about referencing? How much of it have you done already?
So I'm still busy with it, as I'm still on my research proposal phase. I feel that referencing is also it also works for debating purpose. Thank you, Wananga. Either to confirm what I'm saying or to what's the correct word? To kind of what's that word? Okay, it's gone. But it's either to confirm what I'm saying or to maybe as a student, I'm saying what the other scholar has said. I don't believe it. Sort of a discussion to confirm or to dispute what is being there. So it also, that is how I'm understanding literature review. Thank you.
Okay. We agree with also the guy behind you. That is true. Now, it is important, ladies and gentlemen, to, as you work, some of you, as you now work on your literature review, just to get, some of these principles right. Because as I said, if you get any of this thing wrong and now you have to go back, it might be that some of the material you have handed them back into the library, or you have not cited them sufficiently, so you can't trace them and so on. Can be very stressful. Now, let's just go through, simple technical referencing, just basic. The sources that are in the reference, in the list of reference. So in other words, when you end your referencing and you've got sources at the end, those sources are put in alphabetically, the ABC stuff. So you put them alphabetically, you don't number them, you don't bullet them, So it's a technical referencing principle, just familiarize yourself with that. So there's no numbering, there's no bulleting and so on. It's just, they are alphabetical. They are given in the language of the source. For example, if you go through a German book and it's titled in German, you cite it in German. Of course, you can do in brackets, square brackets, English translation. The place of publication is very, very important. Where was this published? And if it's Pretoria, it will be Pretoria, and a colon, for example, as to the publisher's name, who published it, So it's always provided for every source that you start off with. There will always be, that's the first thing that you need to concern yourself with. You know, who wrote it, when was it written, and where was it published, and so on. Now, you do have situations in your referencing where you can have more than more than two authors with the same surname, and therefore you may want to know what to do in that situation. For example, here I give you an example of Brown and Brown. Basically, the surnames are the same in every respect. Now, what do you differentiate which Brown comes first? Because B then comes before D, you can have Brown D, as the second part of the Brown B, because both of them are Brown. So basically, you do have situations where, they're like that. Now, again, an example here is you've got a source that you have gone through. And again, this is a different style of referencing. Remember, the first thing you need to know is that there are different ways within which we reference. I think the most popular ones in South Africa is either, the Harvard or the APA. But please, just check with your promoter when you get to that point. So, for example, on this case is Barbie, E1990 Survey Research Methods, second edition, done in Belmont, and so on. The next one is two authors, for example, Liddy and Omrod, 2005 Practical Research, Planning and Design. And that was done in Pearson Printers. Publisher is the Pearson Prentice Hall, Saddle River. That's where it was done. So just be clear and really, you don't need to be lazy there, because that's really what matters, as you said, Michael, also to minimize plagiarism. Because if you don't cite sufficiently and correctly in details that are there, it might be a problem for examiners to refer, as you said, Rebecca, that they also want to see whether indeed you're referencing the source is accurate. If I go into it, I should find the same information. Now, if you look at another technical information is that the referencing in the text, if you say something that is in the text, it is expected that we'll find it also in the reference, in the list of reference, because you're citing something in the body of your work. Therefore, it's expected that we will also find it at the end of your work. I think it makes sense. For example, if you're citing Nkosi, you can do Nkosi, colon 2005, page 4. Now, that to me means the source is a 2005 source.
I thought with law students, it's kind of like automatic that we use Oscola referencing, not the Harvard and the what. I thought it was, we're just supposed to use Oscola, where we use footnotes, and then in the end we do a bibliography where you cite your sources according to the type of source, like textbooks,
yes,
conventions.
That you had in the footnotes.
Yeah.
Are you saying all of you in this platform use the same referencing style?
Well, in Mercantile Law, that's what they tell us to do.
Yes, I want to know if that is the same referencing style for everybody now on this platform. Unfortunately, I have those that are not able to talk, but also you are at different stages of your studies. But anyway, go ahead, Rebecca. Just be mindful that we are also not getting full value from the other students. I think they're absorbing more the lecture than the participation. I don't know. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, you see, like maybe with my thesis,
yeah,
the bibliography, the first one is textbooks, and then I've got articles that are in journals, and then I've got articles that have URLs, and then I've got constitutions, I've got acts, and then I've got different countries. So it doesn't just say references and then I list them. They're actually in sort of like sections. And then with the footnotes now, we don't put them in the body like this. We put them at
for
the
example,
bottom
you
of
say
the page.
one will be a source in the footnote, right? For example, are you numbering them?
You see, so like the automatic numbering,
or you do the automatic one that goes into the bibliography when you just pull it all together.
No, not the end notes. I mean the footnotes. And then in the bibliography, I actually go there and actually manually put them according to the type of source, like textbooks,
I see.
Articles, acts. And if they are foreign ones, you put the country and then you put everything from that country and then you move on. But in the body, I don't put it this way, like what's on your screen where you say
you don't put the source because it's already in the footnote, but you put it in the footnote, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when you say 2, I know it's Nkosi and it's the 2005 already because you've captured it as such in the footnote, isn't it? But then when you bring it in the bibliography, you'll have a section that deals with books. You'll have a section that deals with journals. You'll have a section that deals with internet sources like those that you accessed online and so on, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, all right. How different is it to you, Michael? Maybe you are not there yet, but is it the same understanding for you?
Yeah, it is the same understanding. I think technology is at some point dribbling some of us. But there was a workshop at the library where you can select and have a file of all your sources, so that then when you are mentioning them on your footnotes, then towards the end, you are able to take that. It will develop automatically the bibliography. I think
that is true. No, that is
I have to set my computer in that way. If I'm unable to set it, then I can still do it manually, following the tutorial letter that is there on Oscholar. Yeah.
Great. No, it's the same principle, Rebecca. And thanks for raising that, because if I look at your footnote, number 7, for example, on the footnote, because it will number them at some point, and it's Nkosi, then it still remains Nkosi 2000. It's the same reference, because if I go looking for Nkosi, it must be number 7 on your footnote, as it will be alphabetically as it will be automatically captured in your bibliography. So what is in the bibliography will correspond with what is in the text. Am I right or am I wrong?
Professor, I think you're talking of endnotes, which have numbers at the end. With the bibliography, it wouldn't have numbers. The numbers would only be in the body, and at the bottom of that page
will be,
like, let's say footnote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're on page 1. At the bottom of that page, there's footnote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All of them.
And then now in the bibliography, you don't have numbers. You're just arranging them according to the source. There are no numbers. It's just textbooks, and then you list them. And now it will be different now, because in the footnotes in the body, it starts with, let's say, Ara Chimuka. She wrote pictures of this. That's the book. And then now in the bibliography, I'm not going to start with Ara Chimuka. It's now Chimuka Ara. And then you put the name of the text. So you start with the surname in the bibliography. And then also you remove the page numbers, because I've seen people make mistakes of putting page numbers in the bibliography.
No, I hear you. So, okay. All right, because we're talking different chapters now. So let's say, for example, page 1 of your chapter, you've got 5 sources. So that will be all 5 in that page, isn't it? But you can start with Zwe at the beginning, because that's where you start as a reference, but you will be mentioned in that page, isn't it? Let's say Zwe is your source. I mean, I heard you saying Ara Chimuka. So if you go, Chimuka will be, let's say, the first person that we start with in your source is Zwe, right? As an example.
Okay, yeah.
You would say Zwe, but you are not going to cite, it's that you are not citing that in full at the beginning. You're already going to capture the number as a footnote, because that's the first source.
Oh, yeah, I think we do things different.
Okay,
because
if the first definition, let's say we are defining a concept, and again, I'm willing to learn from you. If the first person who's defining the concept that you're quoting in maybe let's say it's a book, is I'm using example of Zwe in this platform is Zwe, right? Are you not citing Zwe at that point in the definition? You are.
Maybe, Professor, is it okay if I share a page of my thesis so that you see what I'm talking about? Maybe we're talking of the same thing, but we're losing each other. Can I just share the first page? So now this is what I was saying. You see, like
yes, those are the footnotes I can see there. Now let's start with the first one. Your first reference is OECD, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that is a source, isn't it? And it's it's like OECD as a source, but it's number 1 on this page. Now, when you go to the bibliography.
Okay, let's go there.
Right? When you go to, we're not going to automate it. I know there's an automation. But when you go to the bibliography, where does OECD come in?
Okay.
It's not number 1, isn't it?
Yeah. Now,
it's not the first source.
Yeah, it depends now. Is it a textbook or is it a convention? Or what?
Yes,
do you see now?
But there it is, yeah. But well, look, remember there's a separate source for journals and books and so that I agree with. But I'm saying, do you realize that OECD is not number 1 in your reference? Even where there's even as a convention, it's not number 1. Why?
Oh, because of the letter. Because I have to arrange them according to alphabetically.
Correct. That's what we said. What we said is, although you can start number 1 in the footnote could be Z, when we go to the referencing and maybe let's say it's a book and we start with Z. When it goes to a book, you're not going to put Z if there are other letters, other alphabetical letters before Z. So that's the order that we are talking about, isn't it? So we all agree that there will be an alphabetical order.
Yes.
Although in the footnote, because when you conduct literature review, you don't conduct it by alphabetical order. You conduct it by the relevance of the source to your topic.
Yes, that's
so.
Correct.
Whether it's a journal or it's a book or it's an online or it's a newspaper, it doesn't matter. At that moment, it's relevant. You're just going to put it together in, within which it falls. But when you get there, you then start looking at them from an alphabetical order point of view. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Do you number them? Do you number this source at the bibliography?
Look at my bibliography, Professor, on the side here. Do you see that?
I can see, but I'm saying, do you number them?
No.
Why
I was
not?
told not to number them. I should just put them like this. You see, in the small topics like this.
No, Rebecca.
And then
Rebecca, just work with us. Right now, I'm saying I can see them. I'm saying, are they numbered?
No.
They are not numbered. It's a no. You're right.
Okay.
They are not numbered. Why are they not numbered? Because they are needed to be put in alphabetical order. We said that, isn't it, earlier?
Oh, yes. That's
so you are in agreement with us that sources in the text, although you might have numbered them in the text as part of the footnote, but when we move to the bibliography, they are not. We don't number them. Do you agree?
Oh, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so that is the principle that you have just established right now. Now, and thanks for that, because this is very important. Can I check if anybody has a question on what we've just You just demonstrated. Now let's look at the journal, maybe those electronic ones.
So I can stop sharing my thesis, right?
No. Let's use one as the because I want you to demonstrate the electronic articles.
Oh, you want me to go to the articles?
No, it's there. 8.3 is there already. Let's just use 8.3 and leave it as it is. I just wanna say something. Can you see what you've done? Is that available at, right? This is the site. And when did you access that? 30 June 2019. Can you see that?
Yes.
Now you can move out. I want just to share that referencing from an online electronic so that everybody understands what's the difference. I think that's fine now. And then I just want us to go back to the point of electronic sources, if I may. Now you see what you have done there. You demonstrated the electronic. Now, this is very important. On other sources, I think we are sorted, but look at internet information, how we reference it. I mean, we're saying it's you see where we use the term available at. That's what you did. And it's followed by the URL address for download documents. Now, if you say accessed on, you put a date. Can you see that there's a date that says March 2012? You know, whether you put March or you put the 3, which is the same thing. But once you say 06/03/2012 or June in your case, where you put the word, June, it means consistently you're going to put you're going to reference like that, June, July, whatever the month is. So, but you can also put 6 if you want. But then if you put 6, it means all the months are going to be put in numbers. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does.
So that's basically what you've demonstrated, that when you do internet, it's accessed or it's available at, then the address, which is followed by your URL and then the full story. And then there's an endpoint is when was this accessed? Now, if I clicked on that online reference that you put, I would exactly go in there and it will give me exactly that information that you cited in the text. But then the only difference is that now the year would have changed. The year and the time and date that I accessed it will be today. Do you understand? So that's the importance of correct referencing, because if somebody wants to follow that, they need to come to the same conclusion as you as the person who used the referencing. That's very important, and thanks for sharing that, Rebecca. I think it's a very, very important submission you've made to this engagement, and thanks for sharing. Zwi, is there anything from your side that you feel we need to now clarify? Because I think you have just seen how referencing can be done, one from a point where it's a book, a journal article, online, legislation, and all. So there's different ways within which you reference all this. So, and I think for me, in my mind map now, I would have books in one corner, and then I would have journals in another corner, and I'll have maybe legislation if I'm a legislation person, and maybe I'll have reports in another, so that when you do the referencing, you don't, get yourself confused with all of those at the bibliography level. So I think that's the point that Rebecca is showing as well, that you don't reference the journal the same way as you do the book, the same way as you do a report, the same way as you do legislation. Zwi, anything from your side? You've been empowered now, I suppose.
Oh, definitely, I've been empowered. So yeah, because I think what I did, I just mixed everything, the legislation with the internet articles. Yes, but yeah. Thank you. No, been empowered. Thank you.
But also the good thing is, again, this is just really to overemphasize the point. The good thing is in the text, you don't necessarily have to set them up as books and what. You just cite them. You'll sort them out at the end of at the bibliography level. So surely it's not to say, oh no, I need to now worry about internet online or now. No. That's not how it. In the text, you use them as they are relevant as you integrate them to your work. Does it make sense?
Definitely.
Oh, okay. No, thanks for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have covered what we wanted to cover on literature review, but also just defining some of this conceptual discussion we had. Let me, at this moment, ask if there are questions or comments that you particularly want to talk about. I've taken note of the qualitative and the quantitative approaches that we will talk about, but just in relation to the overall first few chapters of your research proposal overview, putting things together, literature review, is there anything that you feel you need just to hear a little bit of before we break?
Professor, I just wanted to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
When the new, like the guys who are still starting, I just want to, it's sort of like an advice. When they're putting their references, don't wait to compile the bibliography at the end, because you might miss some references. So every time you have a new reference, go to the bibliography and put it there in that specific section. Now, rearranging them alphabetically, you do it on the last day when you know that you want to submit. But putting the references, put them as soon as you use it in the text, go and put it in the bibliography so that you know that everything that is in the footnotes is in the bibliography. Because if you want to do it in the end, compiling the bibliography in the end, you might miss some references, and some examiners might pick it up and they might penalize you for it. Yeah, that's
a smart advice that you're giving to your fellow students on this platform. That do it early, so that you don't have the stress of looking for it at a later stage. So you do it early, and then you can rearrange the bibliography later on by just alphabetical order, but you have it. So it's smart advice. Thanks for that, Rebecca. I think everybody is taking that in, is hearing that. Thank you for that. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, also, I think what I normally do is to have folders for all the literature that I'm using, so that I don't lose it. And then as I quote that, and then if I automate it or not automate, but I don't lose sources. And then I've got the folders for each and every, I think, the folder that is dealing with all the literature that I'm dealing with.
I see. That's another advice, and it's also smart to have a folder so that at least you don't lose anything that you have referred to. That's great. I like that. Any other advice that perhaps on literature review and citation referencing anybody wants to add to? But those are smart advice that you're getting from people who are already experiencing this, and you don't want to lose anything, because I'm sure if you do, you're going to go through the stress that many students and researchers and everybody else go through once in their lifetime. Godfrey, let me hand over to you. I don't see any hand, and you can then take over from here. Thanks, Godfrey.